Despite what you may think or what you see here on YouTube, you don't need more books for your TBR. You need to fall in love with the books you already own all over again. Because what if I told you that the best book you will ever read is one you have already read? Most of us are chasing the next story. We're adding more books to our growing TBR piles, and the minute we close one book, we jump right into the next one. I've done it too. We finish a book and maybe it's left us feeling hopeful, unsatisfied, contemplative, and before we can really sit in that quiet and really digest the book, we're already going on to the new one. And lately I've been wondering, what if that process is costing us something? And what if the real magic of reading isn't just in the discovery, but in the rediscovery? So today I want to explore the joy of reading, not just widely, but deeply, of returning to our beloved books and seeing how they change as we change. Because, my friends, some of the richest reading experiences aren't in reading what is new, but in reading what has already been. And at the end of this video, I'll share some tips on how you can choose your next reread, and I will share some books that are high on my rereading list. And I think also the series that I have read the most of any other series. So I think the first argument for rereading is that you're not just revisiting a story, but you're coming back to it with new eyes. Life has a way of quietly reshaping what we read. Heartbreak, loss, change in our lives, these sort of things build on our reading experience. And these life experiences change how we read sentences, who we root for in the story. Suddenly, a side character that you perhaps ignored the first time you read this book becomes an important part of the story, and you empathize more with them than perhaps even the main character. Or a line that you skimmed before now really knocks the wind out of you. And those childhood favorites like Wind in the Willows or Harry Potter just come with new meaning as you read them with new eyes and those life experiences behind you. There are threads of grief or longing or quiet courage that maybe you missed the first time. And those books that perhaps you read as a child and had your eyes rolling at the adults in those stories, they take on a new meaning when you read them later in life. Most recently for me, this happened with Anne of Green Gables. I knew this story as a child and I was Team Anne all the way. I wanted to be Anne, right down to the long red hair. And I wanted to be her, to be wild and to be so intelligent and imaginative. And I sympathized with her that people didn't always understand her. But when I reread it last year, it took on a new meaning for me as I really empathized with Marilla and her story in this, which the first time I read it, I didn't realize how much of Marilla was in the book. But this time I felt her fear, her love, her complete bafflement at the things that Anne would do, her guardedness at allowing herself to love Anne. And I think the fact that I came to it after I had helped to raise two children that were not my biological children, it gave me a new perspective to really empathize more with Marilla. And the story just really hit differently. Rereading also reveals the architecture of the story. Now you know the ending, you may see foreshadowing of that ending throughout the story as you reread it, through subtle motifs or mirrored scenes or a single quiet sentence that really foreshadows what the theme of the book is about. In Pride and Prejudice, entire character arcs and the entire plot of the story is revealed in a few sentences, but these make more sense to you once you know where the story is going and where it is going to end. The first time I read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, it was a thrill of a ride. But the second time I read it, I was able to slow down and appreciate the prose, the character development, and also the suspense and the tension that was being built throughout the novel. Because when you're not rushing to find out what happens, you have the time to savor how it happens. And you can spot the author's fingerprints, the reoccurring themes, the phrases that they return to, words that they use a lot. I found that a lot with du Maurier. I picked up on a few words that she would use repeatedly. And you can just spot those choices that they've made and the intention behind them. In a world that demands consumption today, rereading can be a quiet rebellion, and I love to be a rebel. It's an act of stillness, almost like when you revisit a favorite city and you feel that quiet moment within you, or if you're looking through old photographs. You already trust where the story is going, and that trust is comforting. But the real power in this is that rereading doesn't mean passivity. It really does challenge you. It gives you the space to ask yourself questions. Why do I sympathize with this character more now? Why does this theme mean something more to me at this time in my life? And what has changed within me since I last read this book? Books can be a mirror to us. They really do reflect our growth, and what maybe was a like or a value you had in the past is very different now, and rereading reflects that, and you can see how you might have changed over the years. Perhaps one of my favorite reasons for rereading is that in a society that is always in the pursuit of more, rereading quietly says, I don't want more, I want deeper. And this is how we build our own personal canon. It's not the books or the classics that someone told us you have to read this book, but it's the books that we have read and we have chosen to carry with us through life. The books that hold our history, our values, and our heart. A personal canon is not about prestige, it is about meaning. And rereading is how we honour that meaning. I may love the idea of a library with thousands and thousands of books in it in my own home that I can go to whenever I want. But in reality, I want a curated and thoughtful library of books that mean something to me. There really is already so much complication and clutter in the world that in my space, I want my library of books to be edited and thoughtful and allow me to breathe. I do love that reading has exploded in popularity over the last few years across every generation. But there is always a moment of a little bit of grief that I feel when I see bookshelves that look like a bookstore of new releases. I absolutely did this too when I was a young adult. I would have, the Hunger Games and Harry Potter would be front and center. A not so cryptic message to people that came into my space that these are my stories, these are my people. But my hope for those people is that reading becomes more than an aesthetically pleasing bookshelf and grows into something richer, that readers branch out and read other books, older books, and embrace an aesthetic that reflects their own unique personality. And most of all, that those books they've chosen for their personal canon become an invitation for conversation with friends and family and even with themselves. So how do you choose your next reread? Lately, I think it's in the last 2 months, I have felt this strong call to reread a number of books, even as I go to pick up a new release off my shelf, or even as I'm currently reading a book, there are some books that are calling to me. So I would recommend that the first place you go to are books that are still echoing in your mind from the first time you read them. Maybe it was a childhood read, a college read, or something you read recently this year. But the thing is that you are still thinking about it. For me, those books are The Secret History by Donna Tartt and Rapture by Emily Macguire. I read both of those books this year and both of them can continually come up in my mind and I really do want to reread them. And another is James by Percival Everett that I read last year. The entire world read this book last year. If you haven't, please do read it. But in my first read of this book, I was carried with the momentum and the adventure of the story. And I really want to come back and read it and explore characters more and the themes within the book more, appreciate the prose. Another way to choose your next reread is to choose a different format. Listen to the audiobook, read an annotated edition, or even start to take your own notes in an edition. When I read Burial Rites by Hannah Kent last month, I listened to a couple of chapters on audiobook and it was the most atmospheric read I think I've ever had on an audiobook, and it was hard to pull myself away from the audio to get back into the physical book. The audiobook that I listened to was narrated by Morven Christie, and there is a certain eeriness that comes into the story with the way that she speaks and articulates, especially a lot of the Icelandic words and names for places and people. That really did create an atmosphere that just rolled in like a storm cloud. So I cannot wait to reread that on audiobook. One book that I have been wanting to reread for a while, and it keeps coming front and center in my mind every time I pick up a new book, is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. We are well overdue for a new Madeline Miller book, and I know it is coming. It is not too far away. But The Song of Achilles is probably in my top 5 books of all time, and I read it a few years ago, and I really want to come back to it and experience it through different eyes. Especially because I have read other books that focus on the story of Achilles or other Trojan War stories that might help shape my experience differently this time around. Something else I've started doing each time I read a book is I will write the date in pencil on the inside of the cover. And my hope is that this will create my own legacy of books that I have read and reread, and I can follow that journey. So each time I read it again, I will write the date down and maybe write something how I felt about it. I think it's a beautiful legacy to keep, and it will be a great memory for me for many years down the track. As for my most reread book, it's hard to think of it because I really only started tracking my reading 3 years ago. And I think it would probably be up there with maybe The Great Gatsby or a children's book like Wind in the Willows, something like that. The Little House series I have not physically read, but I have listened to that book probably 5 or 6 times, which is a lot. But as for my most read series of books, I think it would have to be the Clan of the Cave Bear books by Jean Auel. And these are the Earth's Children series. I think there are 6 books in there. And that is the series, that is the set of books that I will return to over and over again, especially I think The Valley of Horses, which is the second book in the series. I probably have read that the most of all the other ones. So my friends, my advice to you is to not just read forward, but read inward. Pick up that really well-worn paperback, that dog-eared library copy, or your highlighted ebook, and just dive back in, because the story hasn't changed, but you most definitely have, and that's where the magic begins. Now, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please share what is a book that you would like to reread in the near future, or maybe you just read one just not too long ago. Share it in the comments below and maybe we'll inspire each other on this journey. Give yourself permission to pause this endless pursuit of novelty, to go back, to reflect, and to feel. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful week of reading or rereading ahead of you, and I will speak with you soon. Bye.